Welcome to the 25th episode of Kabbalistic Mystic, the podcast for the Western Seeker, where we explore the tree of life and the ancient Hebrew wisdom as the lost spiritual heritage of the West. Well, today we're going to talk about Passover. Yesterday was the first day of Passover, and I want you to walk away from this episode knowing what Passover is about. And if you already know what it's about because you celebrate it or you grew up learning about it, I want you to walk out knowing what is the metaphor behind Passover. You see, the entire Bible is a metaphor. Whether it happened or not is irrelevant at this particular point in time for our discussion. I believe it did. But I also believe that the story is written in a particular way that slightly distorts some of the facts. And whether it's deliberate or not is a whole different issue. But whether it happened or not is almost irrelevant, because if it did happen, then it's also a metaphor. And if it didn't happen, then it is a metaphor. And we're interested in the metaphor because it is a sophisticated metaphor that was designed for us to figure out so that we can advance our psycho-spiritual journey. And the story of Exodus, going out of Egypt, is no different. Let's begin. I was maybe, 12 years old, maybe 13. I think 12, old enough to not play childish games, but not old enough to want to let them go. And there's one childish game that is very traditional in Judaism that I never got to play. And I was pissed off. I really wanted to play it. And it can only be played on one night of the year, the night of Passover. You see, in the night of Passover, the family gathers. And that was the only time of year when we went to eat at my grandmother's house from my mother's side. That is the Yemenite side of my family. Because usually we would celebrate our traditions, our prayers, our rituals were more corresponding to my dad, who came from Iraq. So the Iraqi side of my family. But Passover, we got to celebrate the Yemenite side, and I loved it. We would go to my grandmother's house, and the extended family would be there, and we would all meet and go through the Seder, which is the ritual that is done on the first night of Passover. And here's how it works. We sit around the table and we tell the very, very long version of the tale of Exodus on how the Israelites, our ancestors, left Egypt with the help of the God of the Hebrews. And after we tell that story for hours and hours, during which we drink 4 glasses of wine. Each person has to drink 4 glasses of wine. If you cannot drink wine, if you're too young, you're drinking grape juice, okay? And you get all tipsy. Well, not from the grape juice, but if you drink wine. And you get really hungry because you really want to eat. And at some point, you do get to eat. And then you stuff yourself. And at the end of the ritual, there is one more blessing that needs to be said. So here's the deal. You start the evening by blessing on the matzah. Matzah is this really super, or called in the U.S., I think, matzah. I don't know why, but in the U.S., almost every word in Hebrew it's not really in the U.S., I think it's because of Yiddish. Every word in Hebrew is being butchered to emphasize the beginning of the word instead of the answer. Instead of matzah, you say matzah. Or instead of ahava, you say ahava. There's I think it's from Yiddish, but it's not the right way to say it if you're looking at proper Hebrew, the way it's written in the Hebrew Bible, because we know where the emphasis needs to be. So I'm just going to say it the way I'm saying it, the way I grew up saying it, which is matzah. And matzah is a super flat bread. Imagine that you're making dough and the dough did not have even one moment to rise. So you sort of work it and then immediately flatten it, put it in the oven. And the result is a super flat, super dense bread. You feel like you eat one matzah and you feel like you just ate 2-3 pieces of bread. It's not very tasty. It sort of tastes like cardboard. But for some weird reason, I kind of liked it. Anyway, so we make the blessing on the matzah. And then we cut it in half. And one half is being used for the blessing, and the other half is being wrapped in a cloth and being placed aside. And the point is that at the end of the evening, you need to make a blessing on that second piece of matzah. And you cannot finish the ritual without saying that blessing. And you have to do it before midnight. And we'll learn the significance of midnight a little bit later. Now, here's the game. The game is the kids steal that piece of matzah, which is called afikoman. Okay? They steal that and they hide it somewhere. Now, the adults cannot finish the ritual without finding it. And if the kids are strong enough in their willpower, they can ask for whatever they want. A new bike, a new basketball, maybe, soccer, whatever they want. They got the adults by the balls. Can't finish your ritual, sorry. Well, my father never wanted us to play that game. I don't know why. I think hindsight, it was sort of like we were a guest at my grandmother's house. I think this is me psychoanalyzing my family. I think my dad, who would never listen to this podcast, I'm sure, actually, no, he doesn't speak a word of English. But I'll tell it to his face. I wouldn't say anything here that I wouldn't say out loud. But I think my dad always felt inadequate religiously when it came to my mother's family, because they were the scholars. They were the people who knew everything. And he came from a family that was sort of half religious, half not. And so there was always this like a subtle notion that he's not religious enough. Now, I was the only, it's kind of weird, but it's true. I only realized that in my last trip to Israel, that I really didn't have any other cousins, male cousins. I had really one who is now 10 years younger than I am, and now we're friends. But back at the time, he was a little kid. And so I had my sisters, and I had a lot of female cousins. But that's about it. So I was the only boy who wanted to play the boy game. But every year, when I would try to convince my sisters to play the game of the Afikoman, they wouldn't do it with me. Even if they wanted to do it with me, it was sort of like, yeah, good luck. Dad's going to get all pissy. He doesn't want you to do it. And the other adults will get upset. And a lot of them had wine, so you don't want to fuck with them. And we would hide it here and there, sort of as a joke. But the truth is, we were all lacking the courage to go through with it all the way. To really say, screw this. If you're not promising me what I want, you're not going to get the afikoman back. And that year, let's say I was 12. That year, I decided I'm doing it. Even if I have to do it alone, I'm doing it. I'm going all the way. And so after they've blessed and they wrapped half of the afikoman the way they did, I schemed ways to steal it and to hide it. I got one sister to help me. And we were conniving and planning on how to swipe the afikoman without anybody noticing. Then we had to find a hiding place. Now I'll tell what happened a little bit later.
Wake up, you know this world won't last forever. And take that before this place is going down. We crave for and search for the peace and quiet places. Like you know that they will always be there, but you're wrong. Think it's time to make a move. We don't need no other proof. Maybe we can change. It's not impossible to solve the situation. No, it's not impossible to solve the situation.
I can't remember which episode it was, but I remember telling you the story of Joseph. He was the son of Yaakov. There was Abraham, there was Yitzchak, Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. These are the three biblical fathers. And Yaakov had had 12 sons. Yosef was one of them, ended up being sold to slavery. It's my favorite hero's journey. Sold to slavery, becomes secondhand to the king after resolving his dream, interpreting his dream, and reunites with his brothers who betrayed him, as well as his father who thought he was dead, in Egypt. Now, when they remained in Egypt, they were in Egypt for 430 years. And at some point, there was sort of a fallout between these people who were, the descendant of this family of Yosef, who was secondhand to the king, and the generations that followed. And those Hebrew people, who are now much bigger, 400 years later, they have kids and grandkids and so on and so forth. They grew in power, they grew in size, and the Egyptians enslaved them. The horror stories are pretty bad. Babies being killed, their blood is being mixed in the whatever materials they used to build their houses. They're being enslaved. They live in horrible conditions. Slaves. And so one person, years and years later, after those 400 years, his name is Moses. He is kind of a scaredy cat. He's not really a brave man. He stutters. But somehow, he has the heart that is chosen to lead them out of Egypt. And the God of the Hebrews, calling himself Yahweh, is talking to him, and he's telling him, go to Pharaoh and tell him, release my people, or else. So Moses goes to the Pharaoh. Now, mind you, it takes a lot of guts, because the Pharaoh at the time, if he wants to, just with one nod, you're dead, right? There's no trial. There's no need to justify anything. And so appearing before the king and telling the king what to do is kind of a big deal. But he does it. He believes that he has to do whatever the Lord tells him to do. And he goes in front of Pharaoh and says, release my people. Send them out. Enough. The Pharaoh doesn't like what he hears. And he says, screw you. And so Moses goes back, and the God of the Hebrews is starting what is known as the 10 plagues. The 10 plagues are essentially punishments that he bestows on Egypt. And after each punishment, it says in the Hebrew Bible that he strengthens the heart of the Pharaoh so that the Pharaoh would not send the Hebrews out of Egypt. And the word, remember how I abused Pharaoh and Egypt, is even written. So that we have a whole thing there that the God of the Hebrews is abusing the Pharaoh. He could have sent the Hebrews after 1 or 2 plagues. But no, it was deliberate. His heart was hardened, and Yahweh again and again unleashed some kind of a horrible plague on Pharaoh, 10 total plagues, ending up with one of the most horrific plagues one can imagine. A plague in which one night at midnight, it was the night of Exodus, the oldest son of every family died. Only in the houses of the Egyptians. The houses of the Hebrews were skipped. Nifsechu. That's from the word Pesach. Pesach is from the word to skip. Pasach. Yahava Pasach al Batei HaYehudim. He skipped on the houses of the Jews, and they did not lose their firstborn. The male born, which was obviously very important for the continuation of the family. Not only humans have died, but even the firstborn of every animal. And so there was not a house in Egypt that did not have a dead person. And the Egyptians begged their king, send them away. Not only they wanted the king to send away their slaves, they chased them out. They were like, leave now. And they did. And so they leave, and in front of them there's a column of fire, Amud Esh, and behind them there's a column of a cloud, essentially. It's like a cloud in the shape of a column, Amud Anan. And the column of fire is guiding their way at night, and in the day they swap. The fire goes in the back, and the cloud goes in the front, guides them. And they get to the sea, Yam Suf, to the Red Sea. And they can't pass. And Yahweh tells Moshe, take your stick and hit the sea with it. And the sea opens in two. It says actually that Yahweh blew a wind the entire night, very, very strong wind that literally dried the sea. In one particular place, allowing the sea to become, maybe there was a higher portion of the sea floor. Not really sure exactly what happened there. But the point is, the sea became as if there was a wall from their left and from their right, and the Hebrew people were able to pass. Then Yahweh again strengthened the heart of Pharaoh, and the Egyptians decided to chase them. So they chased them into the sea, and then Yahweh brings the water back and sinks Pharaoh and the 600 men that were with him, with their cavalry, horses, and everything else that they brought. And he says to the Hebrew people, remember this day. Every year, forever and ever, remember. We have a covenant now. I saved your ass. I got you out of Egypt. You worship me. That was the covenant. And so every year, the Jews are celebrating Passover. They gather together for the seder, the meal of Passover, and they tell that story. How the Egyptians got what they deserved, how they were released from slavery, which is meaningful, which is important. We were slaves, and who knows where we would be now if it weren't for being saved. And that's the story of Exodus. Now, there's a lot of pieces missing that I chose to omit deliberately because they're not pertaining to the topic at hand and to the metaphor. But the story is a lot more complex than that. There's a lot of questions that come up. Why did Yahweh tortured the Egyptians? Why couldn't he simply, if he had the power to strengthen the heart of Pharaoh, why could he have made it weak, made him scared, and have him send them out much easier after one plague, or maybe not, even without? Why was the entire charade? What is the point of all this? And in order to understand that, we need to recap and understand the concept behind the hero's journey. The hero's journey is a journey that each and every one of us goes through. It's a journey in which we have to face our greatest fear and ultimately die. The old self dies, the ego personality, and we emerge anew as new beings that are redefined. It happens symbolically in spring. Now, a lot of Jews don't know that, and maybe you're one of them, maybe you do, but the first month of the year in Judaism is not the month of Tishrei, where Rosh Hashanah, the holiday that is the beginning of the year, begins. In Hebrew mysticism, there's actually 4 different type of years. The year that is more assigned with nature starts in the month of Nisan. That is actually the first month of the year, and that is the month that is taking place right now. That is the month of Passover. The year starts in the spring. It makes sense. Renewal. Everything's clean. Okay? And the metaphor is critical to understand that, because the rebirth, look at the story of Jesus. He was reborn in Easter. The Last Supper was Passover. And there's a reason to that too. We'll tie that into the metaphor as well. I'm kind of throwing everything at you so that then we can connect the dots later. So we have the story of Egypt. We have the crescendo of the story of Jesus happening in Passover. And then we have Easter, right? The rebirth. And then we have all the associative habits and customs that are related to Passover that the Jews are doing. For example, Jews are not allowed to have chametz in Passover. Chametz means bread that has risen. Everything that has to do with bread has to be out of the house. You cannot have a piece of bread in the house. And so Jews, before Passover, go into what is best described as a cleaning craze. Spring cleaning. They clean everything. And I mean everything. When I was a kid, we scrubbed the walls. There's a joke saying that people would like, just like you wash the floor, it's called sponja. We would do sponja on the ceiling, you know. There was not a crack in the house that wouldn't be cleaned out. It was crazy. Some people go nuts today too. There's a whole thing in Israel right now, you know, before Passover, just like relevant news stuff is passing on Facebook now. The stuff that is passing in Israel before Passover is all these jokes about how people clean and how crazy it is. And I even heard some new rabbis, more modern rabbis, saying, starting to talk about the metaphor and how if you're not doing this out of happiness, you shouldn't be doing it because it's obsessive. If there's one little crumb of chametz, of bread that has risen in the house, then you haven't celebrated Passover appropriately. Then you're a sinner. That's kind of the concept. And so what they do, in order to relieve the possibility that anybody fucked up and left one little crumb, I should say what we do, I kind of grew up in that environment. My family still does. The head rabbi of Israel sells every piece of, abstract piece of, you can't see it, but symbolically and ritualistically, he sells every piece of chametz, whether it's a crumb that was left behind the couch or between the pillows of the couch, whether it's, a piece of bread stuck on your shoe, and you happen to go to synagogue with it on Passover. He sells it symbolically to a non-Jew, either an Arab or a Christian, somebody from the community that is doing this ritualistically every year because If you're not Jew, you're allowed to have chametz. This is how deep this ritual goes. Now, what's the point about chametz? We'll talk about that in the context of the metaphor as well.
Wake up, you know this world won't last forever. And take that before this place is going down. You pray for and search for the peace and quiet places. And you know that they will always be there, but you're wrong. I think it's time to make a move. We don't need no other proof. Maybe we can change. It's not impossible to solve the situation. No, it's not impossible to solve the situation.
So it's Passover, and I'm 12 years old, and I managed to swipe the afikoman and hide it. And oh boy, I had a good hiding place. I hid it. What I did was I hid it among other clothes that were hanging on the drying line outside of the window. And I literally hung the afikoman on the drying wire amongst the rest of the clothes. Nobody found it. They looked and looked. They knew we took it. They immediately looked at me. I'm the only boy, right? Kind of like boys will be boys. Of course I did it. My dad looks at me and says, Aerez, bring it back. It's not a joke. Come on. We only have half an hour. We need to make the blessing. It's already 11:30. No, Dad. Only if you promise to buy me something. Aerez, I'm not kidding. Don't make me angry. Bring back the afikoman. I decided I'm not going to give up. And so I'm holding, and the adults are looking. Some of them are amused. Some of them are really not amused. My grandfather is kind of old. You know, everybody is, the mood is just, you can feel it's palpable. It's starting to be problematic. Eventually, my dad gets really pissed off. Aerez, you're going to bring back the afikoman right now. It's like, what do I do? My sister bailed. It is me. She told me, she's like, I'm out. You deal with this. And I wish I could tell you I held through. I wish I could tell you I managed to get what I want. I don't even know what I wanted. It wasn't about getting what I wanted. It was about playing the game. All I wanted was to play the freaking game. And I couldn't. And I was afraid. And I gave in. I went and I got the afikoman and I gave it back to my dad. They made the blessing and we never spoke about this again. Deep down in my heart, I felt like a failure. I didn't do it. I didn't stick through. I was afraid. That's the truth. And here I am, years and years later, reflecting on that and reflecting on the metaphor of Passover. Egypt is the ego personality. Israel, the Hebrews, are a metaphor for the true you, your true nature, your nature that is stripped from the ego personality, that is free, that is going from slavery to freedom. The 10 plagues symbolize the process which one has to go in order to reach that place of being clean. Okay? Imagine this struggle that we have with our addictions, with our escapes. Some of us become angry. Some of us become afraid. Some of us use altering substances. Some of us get drunk. Some of us escape in other ways. We all have a dragon we're afraid of, or that pisses us off, something that is truly problematic to us, and we have various ways of dealing with it. And it's all rooted in the sense that we have created a personality for ourselves. But for some reason, doesn't matter what we're trying to do, we cannot break free. Let's assume first, let's take one example first. Let's say we're addicted to sugar. And we're saying, okay, this year I'm making a New Year's resolution. I'm going to stop eating sugar. And for 3 weeks, we're doing really great. We're not eating sugar. Everything's okay. But we just can't take it anymore. And we break and we eat sugar and we go back to our old self. And it's this again and again. We're just like, you know what? Screw it. And the sugar is killing us, our body. Maybe we have diabetes. Maybe we have this. Maybe we have that. It's just, it doesn't matter. It just takes over. Our hearts get hardened. We forget the suffering. All we want is what we want. We want to stay slaves. It's fun. We don't have to think about what we need to do. We don't have to think about getting over our laziness or maybe getting over our desire to be entertained all the time. We don't want to realize that we're being distracted by technology day in and day out. We don't want to face our fears. We don't want to face the fact that we become angry. We don't want to face the fact that we are jealous of other people, that we have envy. We don't want to face the demons. And so we stay asleep because waking up means facing the dragon. And that is the hardening of the heart. And it's sort of the other way around, because in our illusion, everything is reversed. The hardening of the heart means that we give in to the fear of facing our dragon. But the hardening is this, like, we're insisting to stay in this place of knowing where we are. The second you find yourself, you've lost yourself. Who are you? What are you? I'm weary of labels. Don't call me a writer. Yes, I'm writing. I'm writing 2 books as we speak. Don't call me a writer. I don't know what I am. I don't want to know. Today I'm a writer, tomorrow I'm not. Every label that we put on ourselves is enslaving us. We are ruling out all other options. We're becoming set within a particular label that is defining us. I'm a slave. I'm free. I'm Jewish. I'm Christian. I'm Muslim. I'm a Republican. I'm a Democrat. I'm a liberal. Whatever. Every label that you have, your profession, I'm a brother, I'm a sister, every label that you have is setting you in a particular mold, and it is hard for you to get out of that mold. That is your ego personality. And it's easy and it's comfortable to stay within that mold because of our suffering. Now, the 10 plagues, let's look at them for a second. I'm not going to go through all of them, but the first one is blood. All water in Egypt became blood. The reason it starts with blood, because blood symbolizes the body. It all starts from the body. The first thing that our subconscious will tell us, if we are not walking the path that we're supposed to do, she will tell that to us through our body. Okay? She'll tell us that through our emotions. The water has turned into blood. Water symbolizes emotions. Okay? And turning into the blood, we are made of water. Everything is turning into blood. Symbolizes red, like the root chakra. It starts from the body. Pay attention to the body. The first phase of the journey to break away from your ego personality, start working the issues that you have with your body. What's bothering you? What disease do you have? What allergies do you have? Every allergy you have is a place where you're not 100% in love with yourself. Not from an egoic place, but from a place of full acceptance. What disease do you have? What metaphor does it have to tell you? So the first plague was blood. Starts with let's go to the last two plagues. The one before last was darkness, a complete darkness in Egypt for 3 days. That's easy to understand what that symbolizes, the dark night of the soul. It was night for 3 days. They couldn't see a thing. Okay. They couldn't turn on any lights, any fire, everything just, it was dark so thick. They could, no matter what they did, they could not see. That is symbolic for the dark night of the soul, which is the last phase in which the ego dissolves and you literally, figuratively die. You feel like you're physically dying. And your ego personality dissolves and nothing else remains. You have no desire whatsoever to even define yourself anymore. You don't care anymore. I don't care anymore. I remember that. I remember a day when I wrote in my journal, I don't care anymore. I don't care about any of my dreams, about any of my aspirations, about my name, about who I am. I just don't care. I give up. I give up. I can't do this anymore. I give up. I'm no one. Everything I ever thought of myself just evaporated. And I remember that. I stayed in that low point for almost 6 months before, using a fast, I was able to climb out. The dark night is serious. We're going to dedicate an episode to it. But that is what the plague before last symbolizes. And then the last plague, the death of the firstborn, symbolizes the death of the ego, the complete death of the ego, and after which you're going into freedom. Your ego personality, Pharaoh, has given up, has let go. No more hardening of the heart. And the Israelites, the Hebrew people, which again symbolized your true nature, are leaving Egypt. Egypt is the place of slavery, the place of the ego personality. Now they're walking in the desert, and there is a column of fire on one side and a column of a cloud, literally a cloud that is shaped like a column from the ground to the sky on the other side. And at night the fire leads, and in the day the water, because a cloud is made out of water, leads. Now those of you who have been listening to other podcast episodes for Kabbalistic Mystic know that fire and water are the two sides of the equation. In the middle, you have the spirit, the ruach, which is the wind, the air. The air decides who's going to win, whether fire is going to win or whether water is going to win. Without air, fire cannot live. The more air that there is, the more fire can spread. That's the expansive side. And water, there is no air in water. But air can dry water, turn it into a cloud, which can then kill fire with rain, with rivers, with springs. Water kills fire. So you have these two sides, and in the middle you have the spirit, the true self, that decides which side are we going to be skewed to. And the whole purpose of the psychospiritual journey is to balance the fire and the water within us. Every emotion falls under one of these categories. On the fire side, we have love, we have hate, and all the derivatives. There are two sides of the same coin, and all the derivative of the emotions that fall under that category. All the fiery emotions. Shame. Shame is fiery. Right? Hatred. There's so many. On the other side, We have the cold emotions: fear, despair, grief. The good emotions on the water side are called, in Hebrew, it's called on the tree of life, severity. It's the contracting emotions. It's like a mother who prevents her kids from eating candy for dinner. It's the side of us that is conservative, that is disciplined, that is cold-hearted in battle for a good cause, that is brave, not willing to give up. And so on that side, on the water side, you have the good emotions that are restrictive. Then you have the bad emotions that are restrictive, like fear, like terror, like obsessive compulsiveness, dogmatic limitation. Okay? We're kind of getting into action versus emotion. And going back to the fire side, we have love, we have laughter, we have joy, we have bliss, we have compassion. And then we have hatred, we have the desire for violence, we have the need for destruction, shame, all the emotions that burn in a negative manner. Jealousy. Okay. And in between, we have our spirit, the air, and we can choose which one we want to feed. It's a three-dimensional model that the Tree of Life shows us when it comes to our emotions. The same model goes for action, but we're not going to cover that one now. But what's important to understand, that on one side we have fire, and on the other side we have water. Every action that you do and every emotion that you sense, that you feel, can be related either to fire or to water. You get to choose in which direction you're skewed. And most of us in our personality are skewed to one side or another. If we skew to the side of fire, then we're more prone on the negative side to anger. We're emotional people. We're heated fast. Our temperature rises. Literally, shame. Think of shame. Your face becomes red. And if we're skewed to the watery side, we're more submissive, more afraid. That's on the negative side. On the positive side, we're really strong, we're really rigid, which can be good, can be also bad. And that is the metaphor in the story as they go out and they have the column of fire and the column of water leading them. They pass through the Red Sea. They pass through the ocean. They manage to literally stop the most powerful force on the planet, which is the water, which is a huge hint for the hero's journey. You must learn to control your emotions. You cannot ignore them. How does it say in the metaphor that Yahweh split the water? It doesn't say, and Yahweh split the water and it was from the left and from the right. No, it says he blew air, wind, the entire night to dry the water. Okay? And then the water was from their left and from their right, and they passed in the middle where the column of fire goes. There was balance. They've reached a union. The air, like we said, was what made the water evaporate. It is our spirit that we can overcome whatever excess water we have in us, which is our emotions. Being overly fiery is just a way to avoid the emotions. There's no way to dissolve our ego personality without figuring out what's wrong with our bodies and consequently to face our emotions. That's our dragon. That is the Pharaoh, facing Pharaoh. Send my people, let my people go, facing the ego personality, facing my dad, and saying, no, Dad, I will not give you back the Afikuman. I could not face my dragon. I was not set free. It's been years and years later. Here I am now. I'm 42 years old. 30 years later. And I feel like now I am facing my dragon. Nobody ever will tell me how to live my life anymore. Nobody will comment and tell me how to live my spiritual life. If I'm in somebody's house, that person has the right to tell me what to do in their house. But as long as I'm in my house or out in public, I will not be ashamed or embarrassed about anything I want to do. And if I choose to play, I will play, and I will play it through. I faced my dragon, and I won. I no longer have fear from anger. I've learned to deal with anger that comes at me from the outside. That was my plague. That was my ego personality. I was consumed with fear my entire life. I was obsessed with food because of anxiety. For years and years, I didn't even know I had anxiety because that's the only thing I knew how to feel. I lived in a constant state of anxiety. And through my journey, I learned to face that anxiety. And when I faced my anxiety, I found humor, I found play. And I know today that if I would have been back and I would have hid the afikuman, Pharaoh himself would have come and asked for it, and I would have said no. Who's your Pharaoh? What is your distortion? Are you more fiery or are you more watery? What dragon are you avoiding? What is your freedom? What's your Passover? What slavery you need to be freed from? What are your plagues? And how long will you harden your heart before you realize that there's only one narrow path forward, through the water, into the other side, to freedom? It's 1500 years later, and Rabbi Yoshua ben Yosef, also known as Jesus, has managed to become enlightened. He's traveled to the East and integrated the Eastern methodologies that deal with the body and the mind and brought them back to the West, understood the theory, managed to raise his Kundalini energy, crystallize his pineal gland, and became enlightened. He became a god in a human body. He did what the Book of Formation explains and describes and tells us that we all must do. East meets West, feminine meets masculine, the union. His fellow Jews do not agree, do not accept, do not see him. Because everything that he's saying really means that what they're doing is wrong. This new unconventional rabbi is kind of killing it. It's basically saying that all these halakha, all these laws that they've been observing, not to do anything on Shabbat, observing Passover, doing this, doing that, it's all bullshit. At least that's how they feel. It's not what he said, but that's what it feels. That's how it feels to dissolve your ego personality, that everything you've been about crumbles. If everything I thought to be right is wrong, who am I? I don't know myself anymore. How do I move through life? If this guy's right, he's walking around doing miracles. He's not blessing before he's eating. He's saying the blessing is less important. The more important thing it is to give love. If this guy is right, then the entire ground on which we're standing, on which we built our house, our traditions, is faulty. That's how it feels. And so they object him. It is Passover, the Passover meal, the last supper. And Jesus is telling his disciples, one of you will deny me 3 times by morning, and one of you will betray me. And indeed, Peter denies him 3 times before the morning. And Judas comes and kisses him on the cheek to tell Herod the king who is the man he should be killing. He feels so bad about it, he goes and kills himself, hangs himself. He knows he did something wrong, which we often do, which brings us our salvation, causes us to die, our ego personality to dissolve. In his case, it was also physical. But that was his way to cleanse. And Jesus, Rabbi Yoshua ben Yosef, is being crucified, starting a whole new religion, Christianity, which is Judaism skewed. Just yet another version of an inaccurate truth. Judaism is nothing but a religion. It has a dogmatic law that is revolving, literally circling around the drain, around a particular metaphor that is for us to learn. Christianity is no different. They're all rooted in love. And they're all rooted in the hero's journey. And they're all rooted in the concept that you must lose yourself in order to find yourself. And the second you've found yourself, you've lost yourself. Your ego personality must dissolve. Your body must be transformed if you are to become all that you can be. Jesus dies on Passover. It is the time of death, the same time as the night that Pharaoh was supposed to die, the firstborn. And so you have that entire metaphor keeps coming back 1,500 years later. Passover is a very important time for the Jews because it keeps coming back again and again as this time in which something is formed or dies. And in that moment, that ego personality was formed. What happened after that? 70 years later, the temple is being destroyed. The temple is gone. The temple is where the Jews were able to worship their God, the same God who got them out of Egypt. They had the Ark of Covenants in that temple. It was the real deal. Within the Ark of Covenant, they had the scrolls, not stones, scrolls that Moses got from the God of the Hebrews on the Sinai. The king of the same people who killed Jesus then burns the temple, destroys it, and sends the Jews to the diaspora because he knows that they have strength at the time. It says in one of the Kabbalah books, Rabbi Yosef Jiktila, he tells it like it is. He says, you should know that in those times, not only the Jews knew how to do things, there were many different cultures who knew how to invoke God, to work God ritualistically. The king knew that if the Jews had their temple, were able to do what they needed to do their rituals, they had power. And so he dissolved the temple, destroyed it, burned it, and sent the Jews to diaspora for 2,000 years. And the diaspora has culminated, the crescendo was in the Holocaust, after which they all came back to Israel and rebuilt the country again, living the prophecy. And so you see how Passover is critical, how it's a pinnacle, it's a pivotal point in the lives of Jews. It's a time of renewal. It's a time of stepping out to freedom. We must free ourselves from the literal translation of it all and understand the metaphor so that we can all become free. And for each and every one of us, it means something different. For some of us, it means that we have to release ourselves from whatever enslaves us in real life. For some of us, it means that we have to free ourselves from the dogmatic power of religions. For some of us, it means that we have to free ourselves from our fear. For some of us, it means that we have to free ourselves from our anger. For some of us, it means that we have to free ourselves from our grief that has been plaguing us. For some of us, it has to do that we have to free ourselves from the dogmatic labels that we've been covered with, that we've been plagued with, so that we can understand other people, so we can understand ourselves. Whatever it means to you, it's time to free it, and it's time to free it now. That's why a lot of people fast around this time of year. You fast, and you will understand what plagues you. You will let go of a particular layer. And don't think, those of us who are fiery, who thinks they can do it all at once, it doesn't happen at once. Every year you get to shed another layer and another layer as you move on your psychospiritual journey. You must connect with the body. Remember, it all starts with the blood, and connecting with the body means connecting with the seasons. This is the season of renewal, of letting go. What are you letting go of? The whole thing about Yahweh torturing Pharaoh was a metaphor for how we torture ourselves by not willing to let go of what plagues us. And the concept of the name Passover is that we can pass over that physical suffering, that physical death, or that deviation from the path of unity. We don't have to be Peter who denies 3 times. We don't have to be Judas who ends up killing himself. We don't have to be the Pharaoh who ends up dying in the water. We can pass over that and have only a metaphysical death, the death of the ego. That's what this time is about. And in however way you choose to symbolize it and to work it, most of us don't fast. Some cleanse. Some just clean out the house. The house is if the body is a reflection of the conscious mind, the house is a reflection of your externally oriented life. The way your house is built, the way your house is structured, the house that you chose, whether you have a mess or order, if your living room is functional or not, everything in the house is a metaphor. Study thyself. Study your heart. This is the season to let go, to start anew. And it's all begins with intention and connection to the physical. I wish you a season of renewal, a season of freedom, a season of release from your own internal Pharaoh. May you find your way to freedom amongst whatever plagues you, through the sea of emotion, into the promised land. Thank you for listening to the 25th episode of Kabbalistic Mystic. Today we spoke about Passover, its symbolism, and how it relates to our psycho-spiritual journey. Chag Sameach, happy Passover to you all. Happy spring, happy Easter. The song we heard was from an Israeli artist called Carolina, who I love. She sings both in English and in Hebrew. So look her up on YouTube and give her some love. From Spokane, Washington, this is Ovadya Batat, your host, wishing you love and freedom in every moment.